thank you all for joining our panel session today. My name is Mexi. I'm a senior advisor at the Geneva Graduate Institute, specializing in the area of labor and social policy. Thank you all for attending our panel. And I'm very delighted to be joined by two excellent speakers, one coming from the European Commission directly, one coming from Cornell University directly. So I'm very delighted to be joined by Mario Nava, Director General at the Employment and Social Affairs
and Inclusion
Department at the European Commission, and Judd, Executive Director at the Global Labor Institute at the Cornell University. So we are here to discuss a very important question, the triple challenge: labor, sustainability, and competitiveness. And we are going through difficult times, right? We are going through times when we are seeing a push towards deregulation. We are going through times where we are seeing a new narrative evolving, a narrative according to which labor sustainability are seen as constraints on competitiveness, as costs rather than investments. So this is something that is evolving, and really I'm wondering, I mean, in times of acute climate disruption and social fragmentation everywhere in the global north, as we say, we are discussing about having the need to agree on a new social contract. So we're experiencing times of social fragmentation. And I'm wondering, so we have climate disruption on the one hand, social fragmentation on the other hand, and I'm wondering, how can an economy remain competitive without having sustainability and decent work at its core? And Mario, the floor is for you, the question. How is the relationship between sustainability, labor, and competitiveness is playing out in the EU policy landscape?
Well, I think the short reply is it cannot.
It cannot.
It cannot. In the long run, you cannot have an economy which is competitive if it is not sustainable. That's the definition of sustainability. In the short run, you may have some short-run gains to which we are not interested. By definition, the Commission and the European Union is a long-term enterprise. We are accused of being a bit boring, a bit slow, a bit everything. At the end of the day, what we are probably one of the most predictable actors in the world. And it's very easy to say these days, obviously, who would contradict me, who would say that we are not more predictable than other jurisdictions in the world. But I think we have been reasonably predictable and stable and pushy on the sustainability issues since the very beginning. Mm-hmm. Actually, let's say that people started talking very seriously about sustainability with the COP in Paris, 2015, 2016, and shortly after, if you remember, the other major world jurisdiction decided not to follow the agreement that had been taken, and we became essentially the world leaders on sustainability. And since then, all our effort has been exactly the one to marry sustainability, development, and labor. And we have done lots of progress. I mean, in the labor market, today's labor market in Europe is completely different from the one that it was
Indeed.
15, 20 years ago. 15, 20 years ago, people were talking about unemployment. 30 years ago, I did a PhD in London with Richard Layard. Richard Layard became very famous with his book, Unemployment. There's not a single economist in Europe who today would write a book on unemployment, would write a book on labor and skill shortages, yes. Would write a book on talent migration, on something else. Aging, why not? Talent retention, but definitely not on unemployment. So we changed the map.
Definitely.
And so that is a good progress. And in that, later maybe we have some time to go into the various things. I tend myself to de-dramatize a bit of the recent changes, not simplification. Simplification is deregulation, but not the least. Simplification is just the acceptance, the intellectual acceptance that having been leader of the world, you don't get it right immediately at the first time. So, you know, it's a bit like a tâtonnement. You advance and you try to get it. We have had to correct something. We heard what the people said. Stakeholders consultation is very important, and we corrected something.
Social partners consultation?
Social partners, but not social partners, definitely. That is in the treaty, so
yes.
You cannot do anything better than that. But I think we went much larger than social partners. We made very wide consultation. The replies were clearly going in a given direction, and we modulate. But it's nothing dramatic. I mean, it happens. When you are a path breaker, you need to accept errors, and but the direction, the path where you want to go is that one.
Where do we stand now, sustainability, labor, and competitiveness?
I think we have made a very good progress in environmental sustainability, both at the level of Ministry of Finance, at the level of European Commission, at the level of central banks. The central banks did a great progress on environmental sustainability. We are probably a little bit more behind on social sustainability.
Social sustainability.
If you look, I mean, in the last 5 years, most of the difficulty that came from the so-called dual transition, right, the green and the digital transition, most of them were social difficulties. I mean, and that's why other instruments have been created, no? Like the Social Climate Fund that tries to make sure that not only the rich people have solar panel and electric cars, but somehow that this percolates down to the rest of society. So I think all transitions and all transformations carry with them the fact that you need to ensure that the largest possible part of the society follows.
Interesting point. Jason, you have done quite a lot of work. I mean, you are the executive director of the Global Labour Institute. You have been devoted to exploring and the relationship between sustainability and labor in global supply chains. Can you please talk us through this relationship and give us some examples of your work?
Sure. Well, we're a quantitative research shop. We're interested in what data analysis tells us is happening to work and workers, not in the U.S., not in the EU, but along supply chains, chiefly in the global South. So we're definitely interested in this this question of the interaction of labor and climate breakdown, broadly understood sustainability issues. And the analysis we do is aimed at policymakers in the European Union or in Washington. It's aimed at investors, employers, their governments, workers, campaigners, but typically in places like Vietnam or Mexico.
Or Cambodia, I guess.
In Cambodia, and in sectors like apparel and food systems. Enormously important for us, and the subject of regulation in Brussels in the last few years. But because the world of global production is pretty rough and tumble, we're realists. How
is that changing now?
Yeah, so we see some sustainability initiatives they are seen as costs. So living wages is a classic example.
Yes.
You will struggle to convince an employer in Cambodia or Bangladesh.
So before, what was the situation before? What was the situation before? What is the situation now?
Well, before there was no question of living wages. There was the concept of a liability or a connection between the lead firm. It's Nestle or H&M or Nike. The question of the connection between their practices and policies and harms to workers and harms to the environment wasn't one that we took up. Those problems for workers and environments in the places that we're talking about were seen as externalities, someone else's problem. But after 30 years of voluntary and private regulation, we've seen clearly that our analysis shows us that this doesn't work, and you have to establish a floor, so that we're not getting just good practices out of the top firms, H&M, Nestle, Nike, but setting a standard that all firms will follow, and that's clearly an element of competitiveness, and that's one of the reasons why we see some of these top firms calling for regulation, calling for the due diligence.
Even now?
Calling for reporting.
Even now?
Even now. Yeah. Yeah. So some of the elements of sustainability are still seen as costs. Living wages is a good example. And there are elements in the middle. Forced labor is an obvious reputation risk for a firm like Nestle. Failing to pay attention to it could lead to huge costs later. And then there are elements where there's a clear return on investment, and we've done a lot of work on climate and climate adaptation. How does extreme heat and intense flooding interrupt production?
Tell us a little bit more about that, because you have been working quite a lot with big multinationals. You have developed a labor matrix. Can you talk through that?
Yeah, so we're interested in what progress on sustainability looks like. We turned to the reporting regimes that exist. GRI is a good example, but it's hopelessly broad. The firms are allowed to report all sorts of things. They're not focused on outcomes or impact, but focused instead on policy. What's your intention as a firm? Do you have a policy on X? Tell us how many hours you've spent training your suppliers on issue Y. So if you're the regulator, you're going to struggle to understand where's the progress. You can't compare these between firms. You can't compare them over time. So we took what we think matters for workers and boiled them down to 25 labor outcome metrics that firms are already collecting. So if you're H&M or Nestle, you're already collecting this data from your suppliers, but they're not analyzing it. They're not sharing it with regulators. So it's impossible to measure over time and between firms what progress looks like, what good looks like. So we offer this as an alternative or a hack, these 25 quantitative measures in lieu of, or as a prelude to the 1,200 data points that CSRD requires. And as CSDDD and CSRD, go under the omnibus, we'll wait to see what's left in the road, and then offer as an alternative or a prelude these 25 quantitative outcome measures. It's a smart way to report, smart way to do policy, a smart way to measure progress over time.
You mentioned the omnibus package and policy and approach, and I think this is the big elephant in the room. Who is familiar with the omnibus policy from our audience? Yes, please go ahead. Yes, you raised your hand.
You asked for it.
Yes, please go ahead.
The omnibus package is an effort to simplify from the European Commission the current legislation in many different areas.
Go ahead, go again,
please. The omnibus package is an effort from the European Commission to simplify certain procedures or certain legislative files. It's an ongoing process, so I think that the first wave is through, but there's going to be more. So the idea is to simplify in order to foster competitiveness, faster business, faster investment.
Cut red tape, right?
Kind of, yes.
Yes. Is it about cutting red tape, Mario, or
No,
deregulation?
I think your explanation is absolutely excellent. It's an effort to simplify in order for what? I mean, you need to understand that most of the sustainability policy is done through market pressure, right? There is no law that tells you must do this, you must do that. Normally, the laws on sustainability say that you must report what you do in order for the market to give you a premium or make you pay for that. And that was exactly the example that Jason was making about the reputational damage. So if through the omnibus, and I repeat, as you know, I was the director who brought the sustainability, the taxonomy to its approval. I'm not ashamed that 5 years later it's being simplified. I mean, if I were a genius that 5 years ago I got it right, probably I would not be working in the Commission, I would have a Nobel Prize. So it's normal. When you do policy making, you need to understand this. When you do policy making errors, they're actually not errors. That is stakeholders consultation, that's talking to the people. That's what Jason was saying. It's very correct. We have many indicators. They boil down to 25. You could boil down to 15 or to 30. I don't care. As long as you find the right focus on which then the market can have the implication is fine by me. And I think, honestly, 5 years later, the fact that we have got at this shows two things. One, that the underlying matters a lot. It matters to the point that you do the omnibus in order to make it work better. So it matters a lot, the underlying. And two, that when you enter in a conversation with the stakeholders do respond and do tell you exactly what they want. Then, of course, you have to avoid that simplification becomes the regulation and that you lose, for example, labor market protection or things like that. But it's not the issue here. I mean, the issue here is not about that. The issue here is about making better what matters in focus so that the market can give it the appropriate price. Because the taxonomy is about that. As you know, the taxonomy is not compulsory. There's nothing that comes compulsory. It's simply a way through which companies demonstrate how much they are environmentally or socially sustainable, and then the capital markets follow it. So I'm honestly quite relaxed on that. Mm-hmm. I think the direction of travel is very good. 25% reduction in administrative burden, 35% reduction for SMEs before the end of this mandate, because of course, you know, Europe is a place of Mittelstand, so of SMEs, so fine, that's it. I don't see that much hype.
Yeah, relaxing reporting requirements might be a good thing, but you know what critics say? Critics from NGOs and the trade unions say that the omnibus package might sideline labor and social issues. What is your take on that?
My take?
Yes.
Or Jason? My take is that as much as there is a need to correct the initial things, there may be a need to correct the omnibus. So my take would be to academia, to think tank, to trade unions, stay tuned, stay with us, and accompany us. I mean, we have made lots of emphasis on the social dialogue that you mentioned, which is in the treaty. And you know, social dialogue is not a point. I mean, social dialogue is a continuous thing. Exactly. We have 44 sectoral dialogues. We have twice a year, we have the social dialogue at the level of von der Leyen, Costa, and Minzato, so the president, the vice president of the commission, and the president of the council, with the workers, with the employers, and so on and on. And that is the continuous social dialogue. So keep speaking on us, and we will adjust and think. And it may also well be that what it was right 5 years ago, it has now changed because progress has been made. Yes. Look how much renewable energy we were producing 5 years ago, close to zero. Look how much we are producing today, 25%. So it's clear that things change, you know?
Thank you. And going back to the triple challenge, competitiveness, labor and sustainability vis-a-vis the omnibus package, Jason, what is your take on that?
Well, the core element of what we're concerned with in the omnibus, CSDDD, the due diligence directive, the requirement that firms, lead firms, again, Nestle, H&M, know what's happening along their supply chains. There's been a lot of talk about the change in the scope, the simplification of it. What matters most for us is that there is this clear connection between the practices of the lead firm and harms to workers, harms to the environment. If that is intact, then this notion of legal liability for the lead firm remains, and you'll have firms and regulators paying attention to harms in ways that weren't required in the past. So that's one thing. And then on the other side of the package, the reporting requirements, important for us that we move away from this input and policy-focused reporting. What are your intentions as a firm? And instead focus on what your outcomes and your impacts are. without a means to measure and compare over time and between firms, the regulators, the member states, will struggle to figure out which of the firms in their purview need the most attention.
And what about SMEs? We have quite a lot of SMEs active in global supply chains. How do you see the omnibus policy impacting and affecting SMEs?
Yeah, I think the policy is designed to grow over time, not necessarily in terms of its intensity, but scope. So you start with the largest firms who over the last 20 years have built teams dedicated to answering these questions, solving these supply chain problems. There are many of them well equipped to respond to the labor metrics that we've designed, for example. But an SME firm that doesn't have a sustainability department, doesn't have a human rights team, maybe doesn't even have a desk, is not equipped. And they're going to have to learn this over time. Some of that is just a function of paying attention to their sourcing practices. It's no longer enough, even for SMEs, to say, I'm going to go for the cheapest price in the country with the most lax standards. They're going to have to pay attention to the way they make their sourcing choices, and that'll be new, but they'll have time to graduate to that. That's not an SME versus mega firm issue. Making smart sourcing choices is something that every firm can do and has an obligation to do.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Provided information is available, because what you can really not pretend from an SME is that it makes the analysis of whether country X respects human standard and country Y does not. You cannot pretend it. But if the information is available, that's why a taxonomy is quite a good mechanism, then I completely agree with Jason. It's not SME versus big, it's just a choice. Everybody can do it.
Fantastic. When we talk about sustainability and labor, basically we talk about ensuring labor protection, but also investing in people and skills. Mario, can you tell us a little bit more about the Union of Skills, the EU's initiative in that area?
Well, the Union of Skills comes from, again, you could look at it very positively. I mean, the labor market, as I was saying at the beginning, is tighter, much tighter than it used to be. The true issue now is lack of skills and lack of labor. And there is an obvious mismatch between the skills that are demanded and the skills that are produced. And so the Union of Skills is there to close the mismatch. And how do you close the mismatch? We have identified 4 big things to do. One, of course, is to build the skills when people are young. So make sure that, let's say, from 0 to 19, 20, people acquire solid skills. If they don't acquire solid skills between 0 and 20, then it's very difficult anything later. Then it's very difficult upskilling, reskilling, talent circulation. All of that comes later, if you don't have these skills to start with, is very difficult. Einstein had a very brutal expression, which is that till the age of 9, the intelligence grows, then the hairs. That's what he used to say. So I think maybe 9 was very radical, but I think the first 15, 20 years are crucial. And there Europe is doing very well. And then once we have done that, it's important to understand that skills, they need to be nurtured. They don't stay like that, stable for life. So upskilling and reskilling. Talent circulation means taking a European attitude to these skills and not a national. And
what do you mean by European attitude?
That I mean, for example, that if you're a doctor in Greece, you're a doctor in Finland. Fantastic. If you are a plumber in Greece, you are a plumber in Portugal. If you are a ski instructor in Sweden, you are a ski instructor in France.
Labor circulation.
Labor circulation. Skills certification, recognition of skills circulation. And then, because of demography, I think we need to think seriously about attracting people to the labor market. Both Europeans who live here, but also, and that for whatever reason they don't work because they have a child at home or they take care of an elderly or because they may have some sort of disability which may be overcome, for example, with automation or whatever, but also thinking seriously about legal migration and talents from outside
Labor
Europe.
migration, you mean?
Legal labor migration, yes, legal migration and
to fill labor shortages.
To fill labor shortages, to fill demographic shortages. Excellent. I mean, the demography in Europe is what it is, and there are countries in the world which are in excess demography, so there is a market there.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we'll finish with this very pessimistic, with this very optimistic note. Apologies. My big thanks to our panelists today. We continue the discussion after that panel. Please get in touch with us. Thank you so much.